Alrighty, folks, welcome back to another episode of Absolutely Killing It as Austria, where in this episode we're going to be making our first big innovative move, and that's, as you can see, I've already declared war on Denmark using the Imperial Band CB with that age bonus as well as the diplomatic ideas, reducing the cost of Sweden massively and making his entire nation fully stealable. Is that the word? Stealing, being able to make him our vassal via taking him from Denmark, even though he's over 200% war score cost. Now, I just want to say, guys, that this footage here was over 50 minutes long. So you'll notice a sort of varying speed in the different episodes. And this one's really quite fast, so I apologize for that, guys. But I've cut it down to just over 20 minutes, which means it is going to be quite fast. But still, at least I have quite a lot to say, or I have the opportunity to say more throughout this episode. You can see there that event where you get to lose Diplo or Imperial Authority. I almost always take the lose 50 Diplo points, even if I need Diplo points, like I'm trying to rush down a certain idea. The only time I wouldn't do that is if I was over 50 Imperial Authority and just waiting to be at peace or something like that. Now, in regards to this war with Denmark, guys, in my previous run, if you guys recall, I've done this run twice now. This is basically the second time I've done it very successfully. In my first one, I actually had Muscovy as an ally, which is pretty impressive because they're very far away, and I did have Poland as an ally, and Muscovy and Poland typically hate each other, so it's quite a feat to actually acquire them both and maintain them both, considering Muscovy is orthodox and so far away. He's actually fairly likely to rival you. Now, with that being said, if you are able to take him as an ally, he is going to usually help you against Denmark. He did help me in that case, and it was a big help indeed. In this time around, I didn't have any allies, as far as I recall, actually able to help me against Denmark. So I wasn't too upset about that because I did want to kind of prove, if you will, or make sure that I was capable of doing it myself. Now, that was quite a costly victory there if you watch closely. And this war, by goodness, is it going to run my manpower thin. And by thin, I mean all the way to zero. The real hard and downside of trying to deal with the Scandinavians, guys, is our navy is almost non-existent. And I would say that if you're trying to just take over Denmark by brute force in the same manner that I am, it would really help to have obtained the Burgundian inheritance for this in particular. And of course, the main reason is because of those nice high development provinces in the lowlands, which are also sea tiles, i.e. massively or significantly increasing both your economy but also your naval force limit. I would recommend, guys, that if you did get the Burgundian inheritance, definitely invest in quite some heavy ships. Don't be afraid to keep your galleys around if you have them or have stolen them from successful naval battles. And definitely try to get some of that naval tradition up here up until this point, winning naval battles, blockading people wherever you can. Because if you can win at sea against Denmark, it is going to make defeating them much easier. Coming in from the Russian side, which I think is quite plausible, I've been able to gain access every single time. It definitely has its downsides, and the main thing is the Swedes and the Danes can just walk back and forth across A-land there, whereas it takes months. I mean, literally months. It takes half a year, guys, to walk from Stockholm to Abo, or whatever you would say there in Finland, without walking through Åland. And of course, the entire time you're suffering attrition, especially during the winter. It's absolutely brutal. And of course, say that you focus on sieging down Finland and then move across. he very often, one of his little stacks is just going to walk across, siege down Finland, re-siege it, I should say, and then be able to walk back across to Stockholm in order to defend the fort or re-siege that area. Whereas you do not have the same kind of maneuverability. It's absolutely brutal to deal with. It is doable, and I did manage to do it here, and I did resort to hiring mercenaries. Now, this war actually put me into a tremendous amount of debt, and it was the only time throughout this game. I've been in debt many times, but I've been able to pay them off. It was the only time where I actually felt like, geesh, like at one point I think I was losing about 8 ducats a month throughout this war, and I felt like it wasn't going to be pieced out anytime soon. So it was a very hard fought war, but I really had the goal in mind. I didn't want to take anything less than the subject of Sweden, and I was really going all in for it, really hoping that being Austria and being able to defeat nations with ease going into the future, I'd be able to steal people of their cash and pay off that debt, also utilizing the Pope to reduce that inflation, among other things. Now, the good news is that I have 3 diplomats right now, and throughout the long time that this war is being fought, I am able to jam them down. Definitely try to keep those diplomats busy. You can see I'm doing that right now. Unfortunately, the French felt emboldened with me having my manpower at 0 and so on, and he did declare war on my ally, England. I actually did a dishonorable call here. Thankfully, thanks to the reputation from the event, my ideas and Diplo ideas, as well as I think I've got the one reputation from the Third Reform at this stage, I was actually able to acquire the votes easily at this stage, even though I just lost a Diplo rep from a dishonorable call right there. So it is a little bit upsetting, though, that the English, my favors, are no longer building with them, especially because I do need those favors. I feel like I need those favors to go in against Burgundy. But back to the focus on this Danish war, guys. For those of you who don't know, anytime you're going to try to vassalize anybody, you need to have obtained their capital city. So it's an absolute necessity in order to vassalize Sweden that we own Stockholm, which is quite awkward because I have to walk all the way around in there. However, my war goal, of course, is Holstein, as that is the unlawful territory, and he does have a fort on that side. Now, it's quite an awkward situation, guys, because very often if you fully siege down Sweden, and he's got quite some forts there which are really sort of preventing you from accessing the Danish lands, he can be absolutely ravaged. In fact, he can be at like 20 war exhaustion and have rebels spawn on his land. He can just be in the worst situation ever, and it will affect the Danish enthusiasm, but not as much as you would like. It will not actually it will not increase their war exhaustion, let's put it that way, by actually occupying the Swedish lands. So it's kind of a half-hearted kind of reduction to his enthusiasm, if that makes sense. And it's quite unfortunate because you do really need to push hard for this. I think vassalizing Sweden is around 80 war score. So you're definitely going to want that ticking war score to go up high. In my case, I think it went all the way to 25. But you're definitely going to want to siege up the Danes from both sides of the strait, as you're never going to be able to reach his capital. Now, I did prove here without any allies that it is plausible, it is doable. It's going to be quite an investment, and it can be quite difficult, but it can definitely be done. And I do think it is worth, because I do think it is worth reducing your war exhaustion, etc., really investing hard, even monarch points into this, because you're going to get something which is invaluable from this war, which is those sheer amount of provinces after the 10 years and after we integrate Sweden into our country to add to the empire. You know, I'm happy to pay monarch points, whether it's Diplo or admin, in order to get that which can otherwise not be achieved anywhere near the same capacity. Now, I want to talk about the fact that I highly recommend that you guys, you more than perhaps any other nation, the Danish should be, in my opinion, a nation of interest, if you will. You really want to make sure that you're allied to any number of his enemies. I highly recommend that you try to make that a priority, because as you can see here, that this was a real struggle. I mean, I was borderline outnumbered. We had very similar numbers. The Swedish troops, of course, are very strong. He's got a lot of different generals, because, of course, we're dealing with the Norwegians, the Swedes, and the Danish. And you might find that he's actually ahead of you in military tech, because, of course, the starting Habsburg has 1 in military skill. So you can see how hard here that I am struggling. He definitely has a massive advantage by actually owning, dominating the sea. And those are the reasons that I highly recommend that you guys, much like my first game, really focus on having strong diplomacy, having those favors, and being able to call some kind of combination in to help you out. Now, again, I am kind of proving here that it is doable to just brute force him. At what cost? The cost that you pay is definitely worth it, in my opinion. However, I'm just saying that to a player who's maybe a lesser skill level, not that I'm the best or anything like that, but this is definitely an area that you could really struggle and just feel like it's hopeless, you can't win the war. And that's why I'm emphasizing that I recommend you really try to invest in particular, his enemies. Like, I would be happy for the English to be pushed back across the strait, and then basically allying them at a later stage of the game in order to deal with France or Burgundy. I would be happy to do that. And even allying Scotland, for example, in the meantime, who will bring some kind of troops and some kind of navy. I believe he begins with a few heavy ships in against the Danes. So I highly recommend that. But there is another war, guys, with that being said, which can be quite costly, and that, of course, is the War of the Burgundian Inheritance. If you guys have been taking notes so far, we have basically taken the throne of Bohemia. We've fought, I think, a total of 4 wars in Italy, 2 being against the Papal State and 2 being against Venice, and we have taken Hungary. And it is at this stage that I recommend that you go in against the Danes. But many of those people who are just taking a sort of general advice and tips from my playthrough, you may be looking at opportunistic wars against Burgundy, and you might feel like you had the opportunity to go in and defeat him. My only advice is do not underestimate Burgundy. You have to consider the fact that his ruler begins with 5 military skill, which means both him, but also the nations in the lowlands will have most likely be very far ahead in military tech. It also means that, of course, they have a large amount of generals between them. So although you might be able to see Burgundy's general and he only has 2 shock or something like that, one of the actual lowlanders, like the Dutch, for example, might have 6 shock that you're not aware of. I'm just saying that, in my opinion, it's way better to be safe than sorry, because it's very important that you fight this war against the Danish, and then your truce actually comes up and you're going to go in for a second war over Norway, of course. Now, you can do it the other way round. That's definitely an option. I've had the most success doing it this way. Norway is much cheaper to piece out, so that is definitely something to take into consideration. My biggest concern with doing it in that way is that I feel like if I take Norway, then the Swedish may be more successful in an independence war. And that is why I focus on the Swedes first, is because I feel like they're at risk of becoming independent at any stage, whereas the Norwegians are pretty much stabilized under the Danes. So I hope that makes sense. But back to the Burgundian thing, all that I'm trying to say, guys, is in a similar fashion that I recommend you have allies help you out, I highly recommend that you commit on the Burgundians when they are really compromised. Like, for example, when they're being crushed by France and you're able to call in both Castile and England. So unfortunately, most of you are going to be in the same situation that I'm in, to where you have not yet had the Burgundian inheritance, unless, of course, you're extremely lucky and it's basically just been given to you on a silver platter. And that means, of course, that most likely you're going to have a terrible navy. I mean, you guys are welcome to really go ham on your navy. Maybe you could get fleet basing rights. I'd be willing to say that that would probably be viable, considering how desperate this war was from my position. You can see that I'm beginning to have liberty desire issues as my troops drop lower and lower. I think Austria has a naval force limit once you take the Venetian provinces of around 12. So maybe if you just committed to having heavy ships, it's going to be really push your economy to the limit. And with that, and combined with fleet basing rights of somebody up here in northern Germany, perhaps you could actually defeat the Danes at sea, with a good admiral, etc., without any allies. If you're in a grim situation like I was, where you have no allies helping you out, then that's probably the way to go. Now I think about it, I mean, either way, it's going to really stress your economy, but that is probably going to be the more consistent and decisive way to defeat the Danish, is at sea. Now that I think about it, of course, you can always do the trapping them on their own islands, as well as stack wiping them if you are able to beat them at sea. But of course, I recommend that you are trying to go for that diplomacy. If you have the strong diplomacy to take them out in an offensive war, even if it means promising some land, if you do not value the alliance with the person who's helping you out, that's what's going to make it most decisive and most easy. Now, again, to reiterate, some people don't seem to understand that when you transfer the subjects, you actually don't seem to be capable of transferring, personal unions without actually making them your vassals. Now, in this case with the Swedes, that's definitely a strong thing, because we're going to be integrating the Swedes in around 10 years' time, as soon as we've gotten those 190 relations, and it takes a minimum of 10 years to be able to integrate them. But integrating them sooner than the 50-year mark is going to allow us to add that land to the empire. Naturally, if you take a look at the empire, you can see there by the sea tile, it is only barely just blocked out from actually being able to add those provinces. So I think it was in my case, you can see here that the Swedes have Gotland. They actually have Gotland. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the Danes begin with that island province there. Now, this is important to note. In my case, when I integrated the Swedes, I was able to add his land to the empire, because if you look closely, you can see there in Danzig currently, the Danish have occupied Danzig, but they also have Danzigian or Danzigite, I don't know what the word is there, rebels there. Those rebels, as we're really pinning the Danes down and crushing them, do ultimately become successful, and the Danzig nation, or perhaps somebody eats them up, I don't remember, is able to add that province to the empire, which allows me to add Sweden via Gotland. But I'm just saying that in your case, you're going to have to make sure that at some stage, like a future war, you do, for example, take the province just south of Sweden there, in order to add that province as well as everything else to the empire. Now, do consider that if you use the Imperial Band CB to do this, you're not going to have the war score to both take Sweden and release Holstein as a member of the empire. I was happy to not release them, as that ensured that I had a CB going into the future. But in my second war against the Danes, I was able to steal Norway and release Holstein, which is kind of perfect at that point. I don't have to do anything. But mind you, in my first game, and what you might experience is that you do need to do something else, which is take another province in order to add land to the empire. So just keep that in mind. And of course, a way that you can do that quite reliably is to make the Danish provinces high priority, and then the Swedes, if they are your loyal vassal, should claim them up, then you can hand them off to them. This was a much longer episode, guys. Nonetheless, I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you have the best of luck doing this yourself. You can see that I've acquired them as a vassal. I'll see you next time.